Hi there. Today's mini lecture is on the concept of judicial review. Judicial review right here. And what is it? The definition. Be sure you get it down in your head. Judicial review is the ability of the Supreme Court to review federal law, state law, or actions of the president or other people working in the executive branch to see if the laws or the actions go along with the U.S. Constitution. To make it the most simple, if you said, here's the law right here, and then you put it up against the Constitution and you see if they match. And if they don't match, the executive cannot enforce an invalid law because it can't stand if it goes against the Constitution. For example, if here's the Constitution and here's the law, it's not the same. So this has to fall. The law has to fall. Everything has to go along with the Constitution. But if the Constitution is here and the law is here and these are the same, then the law is constitutional. This doesn't mean that it's good or bad. It just means it goes along with the Constitution as interpreted by the Supreme Court. Because the role of the court in the third branch is to say what the law is to interpret the law and to say what, in the words of an old court case, what the Constitution means and what it means not. That's kind of convoluted language. What the Constitution means and what it doesn't mean, or what it means not. For example, if the Constitution is talking about commerce, exactly what is commerce? It could be many, many things. And as we develop as a country and get more industrialized and more technological, exactly what is commerce? And so Congress has the right to deal with commerce all the time, particularly among states. So it's up to the Supreme Court to say what the Constitution means and what it means not. Okay, Article 3 makes no mention of the power of judicial review. Okay? When we set up the Constitution, we set up 3 branches of government. As you know, we've talked about this a lot. The legislative branch makes the laws. Okay? The executive branch enforces the laws, and the judiciary interprets the laws and says what the Constitution means and means not. But in Article 3, there's no mention of the power of judicial review, and it's the major power of the Supreme Court. It keeps the third branch, the judicial branch, on an equal basis with the other 2 branches. Okay? But how did they get the power? Well, they gave it to themselves in a court case, very, very important court case, so be sure you get the name, Marbury versus Madison in 1803. This is probably one of the most important court cases in American history. So you'll need to know a lot about Marbury versus Madison. Now let's look at the concept of judicial review here for a moment. It's all about checks and balances. This concept of 3 branches of government, checks and balances. For example, the legislature makes the laws, the executive either signs the law or vetoes the law. If he vetoes the law, then the legislature has the power to pass the law over the veto with lots of votes. And then the judicial branch, using judicial review, has the power to look at the law if it's challenged by someone hurt by the law and determine if it goes along with the Constitution. Let's look at a situation that occurred early in our history. If you remember, the Constitution has to talk about, in Article 1, the situation about taxes. It says this in Article 1, "There shall be no tax on incomes." In the early years, they didn't collect an income tax. What they would do was count up the people in the states. The states would decide how much money they needed, and the federal government would send a pro rata share based on the population and the census. No tax on incomes. That's in the body of the Constitution. Well, that's not a very good way to collect money. They weren't getting enough money. So in the 1890s, Congress passed a law providing for a personal income tax. And the president signed the law. Okay, then it goes over to the Supreme Court. Someone says, I don't want to pay that tax, and files a federal lawsuit. It gets to the Supreme Court, and they use the concept of judicial review. Very, very simply saying, here's the Constitution. Now, what does the Constitution say? It says in Article 1, no income tax. What does the law say? Yes, income tax. So what has to happen? The Supreme Court has to rule, the law has to fall. You cannot enforce an invalid law, and everything has to go along with the Constitution. So the law was declared unconstitutional. Well, you still needed the money. Didn't solve the problem. So Congress initiates and passes a 16th Amendment to the Constitution, changing the Constitution in 1913 and adds it to the Constitution. So somebody says, I still don't want to pay the tax. They file a lawsuit. The Supreme Court gets it, and they say, okay, let's put those things up together. All right, here we have the Constitution. Now, amended, it says, yes, you can have an income tax, 16th Amendment, and the law says, yes, you can have an income tax, therefore the law is constitutional. It goes along with the Constitution. So that's just a little bit about the concept of judicial review. Super important. There are lots and lots of wonderful cases that we will be studying dealing with judicial review. See you next time.